Hey, welcome back. So today I'm going to present Deep Water by James Bradley. The World in the Ocean, it's subtitled, and it's a pretty cover with innocuous title. You'll find it in, the science section, potentially, at the bookstore, and it was just published this year. It's probably the only book I'm going to read this year, published in 2024, so I guess you could say it's my book of the year. But inside, we have a harrowing and beautifully written and well researched book about the ecology of the oceans and our inseparable human impact upon them. And this kind of leads me into the story of why this book. Why am I reading it? Why am I talking about it? Because if you've been following the channel, you'll probably find this to be something of an outlier. But what happened was I haven't really been able to get out of my head the thing that Cormac McCarthy said toward the end of his life, and while writing, finishing The Passenger and Stella Maris, that science is more interesting than literature. And while I believe this is a false dichotomy, it's a thought-provoking thing to say, and I think it points more to what Italo Calvino was getting at in Six Memos for the Next Millennium, that the number one thing he wants to see in future writing is authors bringing together science, scientific concepts, poetry, philosophy, while using certain qualities about literature that can make it survive through an age where we are bombarded by images, and we have and I don't think this was part of his argument, but we have serious ecological problems that can't be denied anymore. And we can disagree. We can disagree about what to do about them and what we owe to the world to do about it, or simply accept that it is what it is, but we cannot anymore deny that it's there. I think the evidence is there, and this book is, by the way, sourced. It's filled with about 50 pages of sources at the back here. So I do think that I would call this as part of the new wave of science writing that kind of started around the turn of the millennium. I don't know if anyone else has delineated it this way, but it kind of starts with these books like The Disappearing Spoon, which looked at the elements of the periodic table and how they were invented and humans' interaction with them, or more recent examples like Isles of Abandonment, or Entangled Life, or Immune. All these kind of like this science writing that isn't necessarily written by experts on the subject, but by authors who are really interested in scientific themes and want to try their hand at nonfiction, and bring sort of this poetic and holistic outlook to it. And I've, of course, been very skeptical of this kind of writing and critical of it, seeing it as sensational and sort of, like it's just trying to appeal to the masses sort of thing. But I've really changed my tune on that as a result of this book, I would say, as well as many others. I think Deep Water is actually the best book of its kind in this sense that I've read. And it was inspired by Robert McFarlane's Underland, I believe the author says at one point. And the author, James Bradley, he is an Australian novelist, and I haven't read any of his other works, but obviously he was very interested in ecological themes, and he brings a lot of his life experiences in Australia into the book, and his personal experiences of the beach and sort of poetic moments that I actually really appreciate all this. And, I have a few criticisms, which I guess I'll talk about, and I'll try to be succinct in this video, but essentially the structure of the book is like 13 essays, or you could think of them as 13 perspectives of how to view ocean ecology, and our impacts upon it. Like the marketing of the book, it's actually quite genius, because I didn't really finish like why did I get this book? Okay, so before I even start talking about it, why did I get it? Because I was thinking about science. I wanted to learn more about science, and I wanted to learn about ocean ecology. The ocean's always been fascinating to me, as well as just a bit scary. I have a fear of swimming in the ocean. So, and like I'll get my feet wet. I'll go in the few times that I've been to the ocean in my life, on the beach. But I've always had a fear of it, and so I wanted to learn more about, ocean ecology, and think about, try to find like a really sciencey science book, right? A textbook about ocean, the different layers of the ocean, the biology of the animals. I wanted to learn a bit about microbiology. So I'm going to the bookstore and I'm looking like, okay, what's here? What's here? And I see this, Deep Water, The World in the Ocean, right? And it really just seemed to be the thing that fit the best of what I was looking for. But then also taking this sort of literary and poetic approach to writing about it. And I thought, well, that was kind of what I was looking for, even though I didn't realize it. I don't want a textbook. And there's a reason for this. And as you read this book, you start to understand the level of the impact that we are having on the planet is such a magnitude that these science textbooks of the past aren't even going to matter if we don't do something, because 50 or more percent of these species that they discuss, these ecologies, aren't even going to exist, or they're going to be completely changed. Science can't even keep up with the rates that we are changing and these ecosystems and destroying them. And so not only are these is climate change and the climate and ecology crisis, massively affecting the planet, going to displace millions of people, and there's practically nothing we can do about many of the changes that are already going to happen. That doesn't mean we give up of trying to grapple with it and change something. But I realized while reading this, you can't separate science from the climate crisis. And also, I don't think you can separate literature from the climate crisis. Like, this is how this book is the thing that finally got it through my head. What we're looking at in the future. What we're looking at, and that it's not deniable. Now, we may not know all of the implications, and that's part of the scary part. We don't really know everything that it's going to affect. And but it definitely, this book affected me on the level where afterwards I was going to the grocery store, and just at the grocery store I'm looking at my wife, and we're looking at like normally we've been trying to eat more fish to try to be healthier, right, than like meat every day or chicken, right? So we try to eat more fish, but then now this book shows me how like massively destructive the fishing industry is right now, and it's being supported by subsidies that shouldn't even exist, and that there's like practically human slavery going on in the fishing industry, and it's practically untraceable. And then I look at this salmon that I'm thinking about buying, and it's like it's from China, and I just read about how China is one of not the only, but the worst perpetrators, one of the worst perpetrators of all of these abuses, human rights abuses that are going on in the fishing industry, and like reporting numbers wrong and things like that. And the thing is, all of this stuff is stuff that I'd heard about in university. I heard and cared about all this stuff, excuse me, like 10 to 15 years ago. And I really was passionate about it for a short period of time, but then at some point just kind of like stopped really caring. But I'm trying to think why that was. It's because I got involved with some passionate groups of people, and I realized that people have just such a hard time even getting along with each other. And I started realizing that even these groups that are supposed to be helping the environment, they really just become these sort of egotistical things that with everybody kind of just creating all this drama that doesn't need to be there. And it's just like, it's the same as in a work environment. It's like I go about my daily life and I realize how many things keep people from working together to recognize each other's world of consciousness that we all have, that we can't even begin to get close to conceptualizing what it's like to have an entire world of consciousness that a dolphin has, or a fish. I mean, there's a whole section of this book that discusses like the how fish show evidence of memory and consciousness, and even if it's not the same sort of consciousness that we have, it's just as all-encompassing, I believe. I mean, how are we to say that, you know, the life of a beetle isn't just as rich in feeling and sensation and interaction with the world as ours is? In fact, it's almost, or a plant even, you know, it's almost, if something can feel, it can feel an entire world, right? I'm not, and of course, none of this that I'm saying right now is, I'm not using specific evidence, I'm just kind of riffing, but there's a section of this book that does explore that much more scientifically than I am right now. So another good reason to read it. And so I was thinking as I'm going through this book, okay, well, maybe when I get to the section called Deep, right? I mentioned these are like 13 essays. So you have Beginnings, which talks about, you know, even just the atomic origin of the universe, and then how oceans were even formed. And then we get Bodies, Migrations, Echo. And Echo talks about the way that, again, the consciousness, how animals interact with their environment using echolocation, among other things. These topics are very holistic and broad-ranging, and all of them connect ecology to human history, and how all of this climate crisis today is driven and has its origin in the globalization that started with European colonization around the globe. And if you can't get on board with that was a real thing, then you're probably never going to accept anything about this book. But it definitely was a real thing, and it has implications into today. And that includes slavery and everything that goes with it. And but I'll go to the other side of the coin, where I also feel like that for me, the one sort of criticism I have of the book, and this is a very small criticism, that there are certain parts of the book that I feel idealize the Aboriginal or First Nations of Australia culture a little bit, or certain people that he's interacted with. And I've been guilty of this too at points in my life, but we can't, I think it's important not to, how do I say? I guess it comes from my experience of, you know, I've lived in 2 different countries and seen First Nations, quote unquote, you know, people, First Nations people in both countries, and it doesn't, just because you're of a certain ethnicity, you aren't necessarily taking care of the environment or a better person just because of that. And I don't think that's what the author's trying to say. This might be a straw man, but I do feel like when it's juxtaposed with, you know, the ecological crisis, it's easy to get misinterpreted as saying that, you know, First Nations people nowadays have some sort of moral high ground in this thing, when we're all, you know, using technology, we're all part of this. And they may have, I guess maybe what it's trying to get at is there is some cultural connection, some tradition that's being passed down that's a little bit more understanding of not wasting resources and being more in tune with nature. However, even that I'm a little bit skeptical of, because I think a lot of it is just based in the fact that the resources that First Nations groups used traditionally were simply just closer to them. And so it was much more, if somebody goes and like cuts down an entire area of the forest and wastes all of those resources, it's going to be a lot more apparent and a lot more like, no way, you can't just do that, right? But what allows the waste of resources that we have had in the modern era is like this, the fact that we're divorced from even seeing that it's happening. We don't live next to those resources. They're being alienated from us in other places, so that we forget that the products that we're wasting are not like, they're actually coming from a physical place, and that there's a finite amount of them, if we're not letting them naturally recharge. So anyway, that was a long digression. That was more for me than for you. Just to, because it's like these things might sound obvious as you're listening to them and saying them, or you might completely disagree. But it's my way of, articulating them in these videos is my way of trying to understand them better. It's kind of that thing where you might think you understand it, but if you can't explain it to a child, you don't really understand it. So that's kind of the purpose of this. And I really recommend you read this book. It doesn't pay. Everything that I'm talking about is inseparable to my mind from the things that I read in this book. So I feel like I'm talking about the book without actually talking about the specific things in it. But I do want to assure you that it's well researched, and it's beautifully written, and I would absolutely recommend it to anybody who is on board with who is struggling to really comprehend the magnitude of the climate and ecological crisis that we're in, like I was and am. But now what to do about it, like me at the grocery store, or looking around at, all these things, because whatever you love, whether it's books or music or, homesteading, whatever it is, your passion, your livelihood, whatever tradition or cultural tradition you believe is yours, it's all threatened by this. It's all threatened by this. Not just one group of people or others. It's everybody. And what is the point of a great tradition of Western literature if, for example, if we're wiping out more than half of the life on Earth? Like, who are we? I mean, this life, it's like we are in this life that we have to kill to survive, whether it's animals or plants. And again, I'm not vegetarian, but it's like, and I recognize that whatever we are, just to survive, we have to kill. We have to kill. And but what we can do is try not to waste. We can give thanks and appreciation for what we must consume. And then when we die, we are going to become a Eucharist for the microbacteria that are going to devour our bodies. And we should just go back to life. Like, okay, I want to be buried and just like disintegrate naturally. Okay, just let me do it naturally, because I want that. I want to give. That's my only way I can feel good, is if I give something back to the earth for all of the blood that's on my hands as a living and human being, because it's everybody. This is just life. This is just life. So maybe I'm saying it a little bit hyperbolically here, but it's like, this is life. And it's very hard for me at this point to think of, like, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not even going to go there. But yeah, thinking about what to do and how I can at least start with some small changes, which it's like the worst thing you can do is go into despair, or just say it doesn't matter. Like, at the very least, like, if I can make some small changes or be more conscious about not, buying fish from oceans that are being completely overfished. I mean, I think even in that case, buying locally sourced meat is a much better alternative. For example, this is just one example of the many ways I'm grappling with this book. And then the book kind of ends, in a way that it's different from 10 to 15 years ago, where these sorts of documentaries I'd see about the climate crisis or books that I'd read about it would kind of have this sort of, it's not too late, we can still turn things around. 10 to 15 years later, my friends, the tune has changed. The tune has changed. This book ends with a lamenting and like a grief. And I felt that too. I'm feeling a grief for not only all of the habitats and the big parts of the world that we have completely altered or destroyed, the species we've lost, the life that we've wasted and misused, but also grief for the human condition and not just the human condition. Okay, that's get that out of that, but the condition of life that we must, that life must also create death to sustain itself, and this is all stuff I'm grappling with as a result of the book, and yeah, I'm just like I'm at that point, and I'm left a bit speechless afterwards. So I guess that's a good place to stop and say, if you're grappling with this stuff too, read Deep Water: The World in the Ocean by James Bradley. I'll say it. It's my favorite of this sort of wave of scientific writing that I mentioned that melds literature into the sciences and tries to make it both accessible and holistic. So with that, we'll see you next time on Mike Reads the World. With next time, I promise it'll be a new country that we haven't covered yet. But Australia, Australia, for the stereotype we have in the United States of Australians being like fun-loving and relaxed, I've gotten the two most serious, mind-wrenching, gut-wrenching books that I could possibly imagine from Australia to Australian authors. Well, I guess Neville Shuty wasn't like completely Australian, but he emigrated there. For On the Beach, which is about the world being destroyed in a fictitious setting by cobalt atomic bombs, and then this one about how the way the world is actually being destroyed. So thank you, Australia. See you next time on Mike Reads the World.